Daniel Larson is perhaps one of the most well-known lolcows on the internet. Almost 2 years ago now, Daniel was arrested by the federal government after making terroristic threats over the internet. Now, the reason for this final crash out was a group of trolls had actually sent Daniel to a Buffalo Wild Wings for a job interview. This job interview was, of course, fake, and the Buffalo Wild Wings staff had kicked him out, which resulted in Daniel going live on his TikTok and having a major meltdown.
Fuck you, Bob! Fuck you! I will bomb your house till the day you fucking die! You! Call the feds on me, you fucking liar!
Now, even before this incident, we watched Daniel's mental state decline over the past few years that he was on the internet. And if you're not quite familiar with Daniel, he has a very long history of shenanigans that go way, way back. But the rest of Larson's life is a topic for another video. Today, we will be focusing on his future. Daniel would be charged with 7 federal counts, 6 of which would be use or threatened use of explosive material, and 1 count of interstate communication of threats. If Daniel is convicted of these crimes, he will face up to 65 years in a federal prison. However, there was one thing holding up his trial, and that was the previously mentioned declining mental state. Since his arrest, Daniel was housed in the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. During his time here, doctors would evaluate him to see whether or not he is competent to stand trial. However, on March 3rd, the court would come to the conclusion and find Daniel competent to stand trial. Documents have been released that give us a look into the doctor's findings, and we will be reading these courtesy of the Larson Leak website. Dr. Hansen testified that when defendant first arrived at the BOP Medical Center in December of 2024, he suffered from the delusional belief that he was in a relationship with a celebrity singer. Defendant perseverated on his relationship in his communications with staff at the BOP Medical Center and with his defense counsel. Defendant's belief in this relationship and his own celebrity status as a singer and model is reinforced by individuals on social media who encourage these delusions. For example, while housed in the BOP Medical Center, defendant received fan mail from individuals who provided defendant screenshots of conversation regarding his purported relationship with the celebrity singer. Defendant's susceptibility, easily impressionable presentation, and tendency to significantly downplay the seriousness of his charges led to Dr. Hansen's concerns regarding his ability to participate in his defense. So this was months after the original arrest that he was transferred to this facility, and we could see that he is still in bad shape. He's still delusional about his relationship with Grace, obviously, that everyone knows, his celebrity status, and he is just not grasping the gravity of his situation. And now, if you kept up with Daniel for a while, you can understand that this is a common theme with him, that he is not understanding of the serious consequences of his actions. Daniel sort of has a mentality that everything will kind of just work out, and it usually doesn't. So right here, he really isn't understanding that this is his life. If things go bad for him here, it could be the end. He could be put behind bars for the rest of his life. Yet he's still going on about Grace and the celebrities and just a whole bunch of stuff. And there are even people mailing him fan mail. And this fan mail to Daniel is basically a connection to the outside world and allows Daniel to reinforce his delusions even further. Beginning in February of 2025, defendant started taking antipsychotic medication. His psychotic symptoms improved with medication. Before taking the medication, defendant perseverated on his delusions. Dr. Hansen reported that defendant no longer dominates interactions with conversations related to delusional behaviors, and he has come to appreciate that the celebrity singer has nothing to do with this case. And we could finally see now that at this facility he's doing a bit better in terms of mental state due to taking medication that he had been off of for probably a few years at this point. Ever since he had become homeless and kind of wandered around, he hadn't been taking his medication, which only fueled his delusions more and more and more, and could also be a contributing factor to the infamous video that led to his arrest in the first place. Dr. Hansen testified about defendant's mental health history, records dating as far back as 2011 when defendant was 12 or 13 years old, indicate that defendant demonstrated executive dysfunction concerns, which defense counsel argues is required to be able to consult with your attorney. The 2011 records also indicate that defendant had a history of headbanging. The behavior or similar behavior continued into adulthood. In 2017, around the age of 19, defendant was hospitalized after he hit his head and broke multiple holes in the walls, and threatened to kill himself because he felt overwhelmed. Around the age of 26, he was brought to a hospital for punching himself in the face after getting upset. When he was in a federal detention center for being admitted to the BOP medical center, he hit himself in the face because he was frustrated. Now, this is another behavior of Daniel's that we have witnessed for ourselves on multiple occasions. There are many videos of Daniel online destroying his own or other people's property, threatening to harm himself, and harming himself. And this behavior has continued even when he was arrested for his most recent offense. There are also reports of other injuries/trauma. The report from 2011 states the defendant's mother reported that he had a non-accidental head injury around the age of 3 weeks and a seizure around 5 months. Defendant reported that when he was 8 years old, his mother hit him with a hammer. Dr. Hansen did not conduct cognitive testing, but the 2011 report indicates the defendant underwent cognitive testing in 2007 and 2009 and adaptive functioning testing in 2008. So at this point we get to see a little glimpse back into his childhood and the reported abuse that had taken place. Now, when it comes to Daniel's child, I am not well versed on this part of his history with the abuse. This is something that I will have to look into a little bit more before actually speaking on it and going in depth into it. But the information I do know related to the abuse is that Daniel had ended up in the custody of his grandmother after the abuse of his parents had taken place. For intellectual functioning, the standard for an intellectual disability diagnosis is 2 standard deviations below the main IQ score, which equates to approximately 70 or below. The average of defendants' 2 IQ score evaluations is 72. The records from 2011 indicate that neither defendant's cognitive skills nor his adaptive functioning were significantly impaired. Dr. Hansen did testify that she would agree that the defendant has borderline cognitive functioning. Dr. Hansen also agreed that the defendant's head injuries could further exacerbate the cognitive abilities. So even the doctor here believes that the previous head injuries from his childhood are contributing to his cognitive functioning. And it seems that the odds are kind of stacked against his mental state with the head injuries and the other disabilities that he has. They seem to all come together and create the perfect storm, which explains a lot of Daniel's erratic behavior. A function of his ASD which largely cannot be treated, Dr. Mills testified that he agrees with Dr. Hansen that defendant suffers from ASD and schizophrenia. He argues that both conditions are neurodevelopmental disorders that worsen over time. He testified that only defendant's psychotic symptoms can be alleviated, but the defendant's cognitive symptoms cannot be alleviated. He opined that if defendant's primary diagnosis is schizophrenia, then it would allow for some substantial restoration. But if his primary diagnosis is ASD, it would not allow for restoration. Dr. Mills believes that ASD is the controlling diagnosis for defendant. Dr. Mills agrees that the structured environment defendant was in at the BOP Medical Center, the antipsychotic medication, the regular interaction with providers, and the courses he took at the BOP Medical Center helped. But ultimately, he believes that the defendant's cognitive difficulties prevent him from being able to meaningfully interact with his his defense counsel. Dr. Mills testified that defendant is not competent because of his cognitive deficits related to his ASD and borderline intellectual function. The antipsychotic medication only moderated the distracting factors defendant was experiencing, such as his delusional beliefs, but because of his ASD and borderline intellectual functioning, it is unlikely that defendant would be able to recall what he was thinking when he allegedly made those threats, and he is likely to acquiesce to his counsel. So this doctor here is saying that Daniel, even with medication, is not able to function, only alleviating certain symptoms and not tackling the root cause. And he actually believes that Daniel is not competent because his tendencies still remain. And he basically says that it is likely that Daniel can't even recall the event and probably doesn't even understand the severity of this situation. Defendant did not testify at the hearing, but the court did have an opportunity to observe defendant over 2 days in the courtroom. Defendant sat calmly and quietly for over 5.5 hours of testimony over 2 days. He did not engage in disruptive behavior. He appeared engaged, following the back and forth during the cross-examination of the expert witnesses. He conferred with his counsel. Defense counsel argues that defendant is easily impressionable and may be susceptible to going along with whatever defense counsel suggests. Dr. Mills' own example counters that argument. Dr. Mills testified that defense counsel spent over an hour explaining to defendant the pros and cons of being found competent to proceed, insinuating it would be beneficial to be found incompetent. At the end of the conversation, defendant did not go along with what his counsel suggested. Instead, he said he would rather be found competent so that he could proceed to trial. So my guess it would be around this point that they had made their decision on Daniel, seeing that he was following along, no outbursts, and when it came to his defense counsel, he was in disagreement and speaking for himself. So the court had went with Dr. Hansen's assessment rather than Dr. Mills, as Dr. Hansen had met with Daniel Larson every week for almost a year. On the other hand, Dr. Mills testified he only spent about a half hour with him. Now Daniel's case is set for April 20th, 2026, and again he is facing 7 felonies and up to 65 years in prison. Now I don't know what the future holds for Daniel, but right now it feels like we are really seeing the last of him. Will he get the full 65 years? I don't know, but it seems there's a lot of evidence against him. I mean, the video, he's right there, his face is in the camera, he's making these threats. Now at this point I think it's safe to say this may be the final chapter. I mean, we can really never say never. You know, there is possibly some stroke of luck he gets off or gets out early maybe. First of all, that's not going to be for a long time, the getting out early, and the stroke of luck, it seems like his luck has run out ever since the 2024 arrest. And to be honest with you guys, I never thought it would end like this when I first saw Daniel Larson, but his life is a very crazy, wild ride, and I do have plans to cover it soon on the channel. Anyway, what do you guys think about this whole situation? I'd love to know your thoughts and what do you think's gonna happen. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time.